Hello, my friends. It is day 183, and we're reading 2 Kings chapter 1 through 2 Kings chapter 4. But before we get started in our recap today, I want to let you know I appreciate you stopping by to check out this video. And we are asking you, if you have not yet accepted the invitation, to check out the description box below. There you'll find a link that will take you directly to the YouVersion Bible app, where you can join a number of people reading the Bible every single day and leaving feedback on the things they're learning. And so I believe you'll be tremendously blessed by that interaction. I know we will. And I want you to know that offer always stands no matter how far along we are in the year. So here we are today. We're reading another book of the Bible. We're setting a new milestone. We've met a new milestone, should I say. We are in, I don't know how many books we read so far, but we've read quite a bit. And we're in the thick of this thing now. So a great portion of the Bible, at least in a yearly Bible calendar, is spent in the Old Testament. We are now in our 7th month of reading the Bible. And more specifically, we have spent 7 months of reading the Old Testament. And we have not even yet began to really tip into the works of the prophets. You have some of the largest prophetic books yet to read in Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Isaiah. And then you also have what the Bible calls the minor prophets, which helps us understand something about the Bible. It is that the Old Testament is so critical to understanding what the collective message of the Bible is, that we must spend a significant amount of time in it, not just because it's the larger portion of the Bible, but it is the most helpful part of the Bible that makes the New Testament understandable. I was reading in a commentary recently that the New Testament is essentially a commentary of the Old Testament, meaning what the New Testament writers are doing is they're taking information and content from the Old Testament, and they are interpreting the Old Testament within the reality of their own lives and their own lived experiences. And the Spirit is helping them recognize how the Old Testament is the data or the information, it's the content that they need to discern what it is that they are experiencing within the will of God. So it's so important that we approach the Old Testament as a first century believer would approach it, as the book that is given to us and inspired to help us discern what is happening in our world. And we do that by inviting Jesus Christ to the conversation, right? So what I want to say is we want to pay close attention to what we're reading so far, particularly what we're reading now, because this is the foundation that gives us an understanding of why Israel needs a Messiah and why they are looking for one. It is this tension, this conflict between the pagan nations and the northern and southern tribes of Israel, the chastisement, the rebellion, the apostasy, the prophetic ministry. All of these things help us understand the New Testament in a far greater way than we could ever understand it by just simply over personalizing it and making it about a 21st century attempt at salvation. There's so much more to it than that. And we want to make sure we get the narrative right so that we can get the message right. Okay. So here we are in the book of 2 Kings, and Elijah is still kicking and still ministering, if you will, even though he's reaching the end of his time here on earth and his ministry. His last prophetic message, if you will, is to Ahaziah, who is idolatrous, is just as perhaps not quite as bad, but because Ahab was pretty bad, but he is definitely within the line of behavior as Ahab. And Elijah in this passage is depicted in a certain way that should make us pay attention and help us understand another character in the Bible that will become just as popular as Elijah is. He's depicted in verse 8 as a hairy man who wore a leather belt around his waist. Now, the person that we remember in the New Testament that fits this description would operate with the same ministerial focus. And this is none other than John the Baptist in Matthew chapter 3, verse 4. And just to show you what I mean about how the Old Testament informs the New Testament, how it is the source, the content, and the New Testament is in many ways an interpretation of it. You see how Second Kings chapter 1, it mentions Elijah being a man who is hairy and who walks around with a leather belt, right? Now, in chapter 3, verse 4 of the book of Matthew, it talks about John saying, John's clothes were woven from coarse camel hair, and he wore a leather belt around his waist. For food, he ate locusts and wild honey. And so you can see in this passage that what the New Testament writer is doing is drawing a comparison, drawing a somewhat of a parallel between John the Baptist and Old Testament Elijah. And the purpose for that is to hopefully let them see, or help them see at least, that Elijah, or rather John the Baptist, in many ways is embodying not only the persona, but the ministry and the prophetic role of Elijah in his own generation. This prophecy from Malachi is even more helpful to this point whenever we read in chapter 4, verse 5, that I am sending you the prophet Elijah before the great and dreadful day of the Lord arrives, and his preaching will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children and the hearts of the children to their fathers. Otherwise, I will come and strike the land with a curse. So when you look at chapter 4, verse 5 and verse 6, and you see that there is at the end of the Old Testament an expectation of one who will come in the likeness and in the character, if you will, both ministerially and perhaps personality wise of Elijah, then you understand exactly what the New Testament is getting at. This is why I said earlier, we want to be paying attention, because this is such good content. We can't afford to miss any of this. Now, Elijah is on Ahaziah for his respect that he pays and the way that he approaches Beelzebub. He seeks him rather than seeking the Lord. He consults him rather than consulting the Lord. And Elijah brings that out, and he prophesies his death, which happens at the end of chapter 1. So the prophets are here, and we're going to see that their ministry is even more significant as the biblical narrative continues. But perhaps one of the greatest parts of 2 Kings is the transition from Elijah to Elisha, or Elijah to Elisha, some people would say. And it is in chapter 2 that we see this transition take place, where Elisha requests a double portion of his spirit. In the end, he kind of ran a roundabout way he gets that, but more importantly, his mantle, the mantle of Elijah, is passed to Elisha, and he now becomes what Elijah was to the nation of Israel. He is that and much more. I mean, Elisha is not only out there prophesying, but he's working miracles. He's working some miracles, and he's not only serving as a powerful and miracle worker in his own time, but he's setting an example. Maybe should I say, following a tradition that was set through Moses, and setting an example that would be significant to understanding the message and the ministry of Jesus Christ. You see, because Jesus's ministry was not just prophetic, meaning what he said, but it was miraculous what he did. It was powerful. And so we have these kind of figures to kind of set up what Jesus will do and establish an expectation of what a Messiah should be like. And that's what we have. There are a number of things that happen here. We see in chapter 4, where Elisha, of course, the situation with the widow, and then also the woman from Shunem. She obviously had hopes for a child, and that child did not survive. And Elisha goes there and resurrects him. What an incredible passage to point us to resurrection power and the sort of resurrection that Israel can expect from Jesus Christ, or from the Messiah whom they will anticipate later down the line. But again, this content will serve them in multiple ways as they begin to go through processes of exile, destruction, judgment, chastisement, and other things. So Elisha is on fire. He is a He seems to have gotten what he desired, and the Lord's going to use him in an incredible way. But there are so many things we can learn here or say about this. What are some things that stood out to you guys? So leave them in the comment box below. I'd love to hear more about what you are thinking about these passages, and I think they will be incredibly helpful for us all. But let's keep reading. There's so much more to study and read, but we just all want to get as much as we can in the time that the Lord gives us. So let's keep doing this. Let's keep encouraging one another, and I believe we'll make it to the end. Until next time, thank you for watching. Take care. God bless. And remember, live by the word.